The wind carried no mercy across the high plains. It dragged sand across stone, whistled through scrub brush, and sang a cruel song to anyone left beneath the open sky. Somewhere between rusted fence posts and the fading outline of cattle trails, a woman was chained to a tree. Her name was Lena Hart, once a rancher's daughter, once a cowgirl with fire in her hands and a rifle on her back. But now she was half-conscious, wrists raw from iron cuffs, lips cracked from thirst, and dress torn from struggling against a fate that wasn't hers to choose. They'd left her here, tied to die, not for what she'd done, but for what she refused to do. Miles away, across the flat horizon, a lone figure rode at a steady pace. His coat was worn, hat pulled low. His saddle creaked with the rhythm of someone who'd been riding since before memory had meaning. He had no name anyone used, no home anyone knew. Some called him Weston, others just called him Ghost, a cowboy with no past, no kin, and no questions. He didn't look for people, and he sure as hell didn't look for trouble. But when his horse shied near a crooked mesquite, Weston dismounted, cautious, quiet. That's when he saw the glint of metal on skin. Lena didn't speak when he stepped into the clearing. She barely lifted her head, dirt smudged across her cheeks, blood crusted at her collarbone. But there was defiance in her eyes, even half dead. Weston crouched, scanned the bindings, then looked her in the eye. "They do this to you?" he asked, voice low. She nodded, barely. He pulled out a small knife, rusted from time, and went to work on the chains. They clanked hard against bark before finally loosening. Lena collapsed forward. He caught her. "You got a name?" he asked. "Lena," she rasped. He nodded once. "You're not dying today, Lena." As the sun dropped behind the hills, Weston lifted her onto his horse and walked beside it, leading them both into the unknown. He didn't know who she was, didn't know who had done this, didn't ask. But something in the way she had stared down death told him this wasn't over. Weston didn't take Lena into town. He didn't trust towns, too full of talkers, watchers, and men who carried power in their pockets. Instead, he led her to a canyon where the wind softened and the rocks held shadows. There, tucked between boulders and cottonwood trees, stood a half-rotted shack left behind by outlaws or miners, long gone. He'd stayed there once, years ago, maybe months. Time blurred when you weren't keeping track. He carried Lena inside, laid her gently on a bedroll, and began boiling water. She didn't stir at first. Her body trembled beneath the thin blanket, and her breathing was shallow, but steady. He checked her wrists, raw but not cut to the bone. Her lips moved. "Why?" Weston leaned in. "What's that? Why'd you help me?" He paused as if trying to remember the answer himself. "Didn't like the look of chains on someone who still had fight left," he said. Later that night, she finally sat upright. He passed her a tin of water. She drank slow, cautious. "You got a name?" she asked. He shrugged. "Used to. Don't need one much." She tilted her head. "You one of those drifters with a past too dark to talk about?" He didn't flinch. "Or maybe I just forgot it." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "Fair." By morning, color had returned to her cheeks. She moved stiffly, but with purpose. Weston watched as she stood, staggered to the doorway, and stared out at the sun rising over the canyon wall. "You ain't from around here," she said. "I ain't from anywhere." "Then maybe you're just where you need to be," she said softly. He patched her boots, fed her jerky and beans, and said little. But on the third day, while Lena was stringing her hair into a braid, she said, "They chained me because I said no." Weston looked up, quiet. "My uncle owns Hart Ranch. After my father passed, he started calling the shots. Brought in men who had more guns than cattle, more whiskey than honor. I stood in the way. Said the land was never meant to be sold to men who steal it." "They tried to sell you with it?" Weston asked. She met his eyes. "They tried to break me. When I wouldn't sign over my name on paper, they dragged me out into the flats and left me for dead." Weston looked at the fire, his voice low. "You're still breathing." Lena's mouth lifted at one corner. "Thanks to a cowboy with no name." He stood and handed her a saddlebag. "Where you going now?" she asked. "Where you going?" he countered. She hesitated. "I want my land back. My name. And I want those men to know they didn't bury me." Weston nodded once. "Then I reckon I'll ride with you." And just like that, two people with no promises between them rode toward the place where Justice had died, and where they planned to dig it back up. They rode at first light. Lena sat straighter in the saddle than Weston expected for someone still healing. Her wrists were wrapped in clean cloth, her sleeves rolled down to hide the bruises. She didn't speak much, only scanned the horizon like a woman already imagining how it would feel to take something back that should have never been stolen. Weston rode beside her, silent as shadow. His horse moved with the ease of one who'd traveled far and never once asked why. He didn't ask questions, not about what she planned, not about what she would do when she stood face to face with the men who left her to die. But when they reached the ridge overlooking Hart Ranch, he finally said, "You sure about this?" Lena narrowed her eyes at the sight below. Wide pastures, new fences, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney. That land was my father's, every inch of it paid for in blood and sweat, and they tried to bury me to take it. She turned to him. I was born on that dirt. I'll either die on it or take it back. That night, they camped in the low brush a half-mile from the ranch line. Weston cleaned his rifle in slow, careful movements. Lena sharpened her knife against a flat stone. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from fear. It was the kind that means they're ready. "You said you ain't got a name," she said as the fire crackled low. "I got one, just stopped using it. You ever think about taking it back?" He didn't answer right away. "Then some names ain't worth what they cost." Lena looked at him, her voice soft. "Maybe it's not about what it cost. Maybe it's about what it could mean now." He met her eyes. Two worn-out riders sitting in the dark, closer than strangers should be, but not close enough to break the things they hadn't said. "You think people like us get that chance?" he asked. Lena leaned back, looking at the stars. "I think people like us have to take it." The next morning they watched from the rise as a rider left the ranch. One of her uncle's men, same coat she remembered, same slouch in the saddle. "He was there," Lena said, voice clipped. "He laughed when they chained me." Weston loaded his rifle. "Then let's wipe the grin off him." What happened next wasn't fast. It wasn't glorious. It was controlled. Weston rode out alone, circled behind the bluff, and cut the man off near the creek crossing. No words exchanged. Just a cold look, a drawn gun, and a truth spoken low. "She's not dead." The man panicked, fumbled, drew. Too slow. Weston left him on the trail with a wound through the leg and a warning. "Tell the ranch, she's coming, and she's not chained anymore." Lena watched him ride back, dust curling behind his horse like smoke from a starting fire. And for the first time since she'd been left under the sun with death breathing on her neck, she smiled. The message reached Hart Ranch before sunset. The wounded rider arrived pale, bloodied, and shaking, muttering only one name, Lena. Inside the main house, Jeb Hart, Lena's uncle and the man who'd signed away his own blood for a share of whiskey and quick profit, spilled his drink across the floor when he heard it. "She was dead," he said to the room. "No, sir," one of the hired guns replied, adjusting his collar nervously. "She's not, and she's not alone." At the edge of the canyon, Lena braided her hair back and strapped her father's old revolver to her hip. She hadn't worn it since the funeral. Her hand trembled only once as she tightened the buckle. Weston stood nearby, checking his rifle with the same practiced calm he carried into every moment. "You ready?" he asked. Lena didn't even look at him. "I was born ready. I just forgot for a little while." They didn't ride in guns blazing. They rode in like ghosts. Just before dusk, they approached from the east, the low sun at their backs. The ranch hands on the fence line barely saw them before they were past the gate. Lena slid off her horse in one motion and walked toward the porch like it still belonged to her, which it did. Jeb Hart stepped outside, boots heavy on the wood, his beard half gray and stained with tobacco. The last time he saw her, she'd been coughing up sand and blood. Now she stood with her shoulders square and her eyes sharp. "I thought you were dead," he said. "You hoped I was," she replied. He gestured to the men gathering behind him, 3 in total. "You think you can come back here with some stray and take what ain't yours?" She stepped forward. "It is mine, and the law agrees, unless you burned the land deed too." Jeb spat. "You ain't got the strength." Weston's voice came from behind her, low and steady. "She doesn't have to, I do." The first man drew his pistol. Weston was faster. One shot, not fatal, but loud enough to silence the porch. Jeb staggered back. "This ranch belonged to Lena's father," Weston said, "and by every right it belongs to her now." Lena climbed the porch steps. Her voice didn't tremble. "You tried to sell it to outlaws. You chained me like a criminal. But I'm still here, Jeb, and I remember everything." He tried to reach for a weapon. Too late. Lena's boot landed square in his chest, sending him crashing backward into the wall. Weston disarmed the others with quiet precision. No deaths, no flames, just justice. Simple, final. By nightfall, the house was quiet again. Lena stood on the porch, looking out at the fields. "I thought I'd burn this place down when I came back," she said. Weston sat beside her. "Why didn't you?" "Because it's not the land that hurt me. It's the men who thought I didn't belong on it." He nodded slowly. "You do now." She looked at him. "We both do." The ranch didn't feel like home yet. The land was still marked with the weight of betrayal. Trampled fences, burned corners of pasture, old scars left by men who'd come with greed in their boots. But Lena Hart wasn't the same woman who'd been dragged off this porch in chains, and she didn't need it to feel like home. Not yet. She just needed it to be hers again. The next few weeks passed with the rhythm of rebuilding. Lena and Weston worked side by side, mending the barn roof, tossing out crates filled with rot and rust, hauling water until their hands blistered. Weston didn't ask for comfort, didn't expect anything in return. But every night, he lit the fire. Every morning, he made the coffee. And every moment, Lena watched him with a growing question in her chest. Why did a man with no past stay long enough to become part of hers? One evening, as the sun slipped behind the cottonwoods, she found him at the edge of the field, staring out into the open dusk. "You could have left," she said, standing beside him. "I could have," he agreed. "But you didn't." He turned to face her. "Because I've seen what happens when people walk away, and I've had enough of ghost towns and empty names." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket, pulled out a rusted spur, her father's. "I've been holding on to this since the funeral. Thought maybe it would tell me what to do." She handed it to him. "Now I think maybe I was supposed to give it to someone who stayed when I couldn't stand on my own." Weston looked at it for a long moment, then slid it into his saddlebag without a word. They stood together in the quiet, not touching, but no longer apart. Later that night, as they sat by the fire, Lena looked across the flames and asked, "You ever going to tell me your real name?" He stirred the embers once, then said, "I used to be Jack Weston once. Back before the war, before the debt, before I stopped answering to it." "Jack?" she said, testing it. "Doesn't sound like a ghost." "I guess I ain't one anymore." In the days that followed, they put up new fence lines, ordered new supplies from Tom Brock. The old hands came back, those who'd respected Lena's father, those who'd left when Jeb brought in hired guns and bad whiskey. No one asked what happened. They saw the woman with her chin high, the man with the rifle at her side, and they understood. The ranch was hers again. And Jack Weston? He'd finally found a place where his past didn't matter, because someone looked at him and saw the man he chose to be. Spring rolled in slow and sure. The rains were light, but steady enough to coax green from the dry earth. Lena rode the fence lines at dawn with dust in her hair and pride in her eyes. The ranch was waking up again, not to what it had been, but to something earned, not inherited. Every post they reset, every field they cleared, every scar they mended, it all became part of the new Hart Ranch. And part of them, Jack, no longer just Weston, never spoke much of his past, but little pieces slipped through. A mention of a brother lost in war, a locket he kept in the bottom of his saddlebag that he never opened, but never left behind. Lena didn't push. She understood what it meant to carry things in silence. One evening, while they shelled beans by lantern light, she finally asked, "Why me?" He didn't look up. "What do you mean? You've been riding alone so long. Why stay? Why this ranch? Why me?" He set the bowl aside and met her gaze, quiet but unshaken. "Because you were chained and still looked the world in the eye." She felt that land in her chest shift, the part that had gone cold and hard when they left her in the dirt. "You make me want to stay," he added. "That's not something I've felt since I buried my name." Days turned into weeks. Together they rebuilt the corral. The first calf was born late one night, and Lena wrapped it in burlap while Jack held the lantern. She laughed as it kicked to its feet and stared wide-eyed into the world. "You think this one will be trouble?" she asked. Jack smiled. "Hope so." By midsummer, the ranch was steady. The house stood proud. People from town began stopping by, offering supplies, asking if Lena would reopen her father's trade route for cattle. She was hesitant at first, until Jack reminded her, "You didn't take this land back just to keep it quiet." So she did. The Hart brand rode again, burned fresh into a new generation of stock. Honest, clean, free. One afternoon, while repairing the old windmill, Jack looked down to find Lena watching him with something unreadable in her eyes. "You all right?" he called. She nodded slowly. "I think I'm in love with a man who forgot how to belong. Until now." He descended the ladder without a word, boots hitting the dirt, took her hands in his. "Then I think it's time I start learning how to stay." Summer burned long and hot. Dust clung to every fence rail, every boot heel, and every breath of wind. But the heat didn't bother Lena. Not now. Not when she could ride her own land, call her own shots, and know she hadn't just inherited the Hart Ranch. She'd fought for it. Jack carved the new sign by hand. He didn't say anything about it. Just worked on it quietly each evening with a knife and steady hands. He used the last plank of seasoned oak from Lena's father's stash, and when she found it one morning leaning against the barn, she didn't speak for a long time. It read, Hart and Weston Ranch, burned deep, the letters bold, balanced. "It's not just mine," she whispered. He stood behind her, arms folded. "It hasn't been for a while." That evening, they hung the sign above the gate together. Jack lifted it into place. Lena hammered the last nail. When it was done, they stood back in the fading light and looked at what they'd made. Not just a ranch, but a name, a truth, a future. Later on the porch, they sat in the warm silence of a shared life beginning to bloom. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. "I didn't think I'd end up anywhere." Lena tilted her head. "You miss the road?" "Some nights." "And the rest?" He looked at her, full and still. "The rest, I thank God I stayed." That night, as a storm rolled over the hills in the distance and the wind picked up across the pasture, Lena reached for his hand. "I used to think chains only came in iron," she said. "But the worst ones, they were invisible. Expectations, names, lies." Jack squeezed her hand. "And now, I've never felt freer." They didn't talk about marriage. Not yet. They didn't need to, because every beam they repaired, every trail they cleared, every sunrise they rode toward together, those things were vows, not made with rings or paper, but with presence, with choice, with staying, and above it all, the new sign swung gently in the wind. The past buried, the chains broken, and the future just beginning. The rain hit like a warning, hard, sudden, and sharp enough to rattle the windows in their frames. Lightning lit the canyon rim and left shadows twisting across the porch. Inside the house, Lena moved quickly, securing what she could, blankets, tools, the lantern swinging in the kitchen. Jack was already in the barn when it started. He wasn't the type to flinch at thunder or wait for the storm to settle. He moved between the stalls, calming the horses, checking the rafters, hands steady, even as the sky cracked above them. Lena arrived soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her face. "You're terrible at waiting out weather," she said over the wind. "I'm worse at losing stock," he answered. She grabbed a bucket and joined him, because that was what they did now, face the storm side by side. By morning, the worst had passed. The fields were a mess of mud and branches, but the house still stood. The cattle were safe, the water barrels full. They stood on the porch, boots sunk in wet soil, watching dawn roll across the broken clouds. Jack leaned on the rail, water dripping from his hat. "That'll teach the land not to take us for granted," he said. Lena laughed. "Or remind us we're still small." That afternoon, a rider came up the trail. Not trouble. This one wore the dust of travel, not violence. He carried a letter, handed it to Lena with a respectful nod, and rode on without asking questions. She opened it at the kitchen table, Jack beside her. It was from Sheriff Callan in Tombrock, the man who'd once kept quiet about her uncle's dealings, the man who looked away when the wrong name signed land deeds. But now he wrote with apology. "Jeb Hart died last week in jail. No kin came for the body. Word around town says the Hart Ranch has turned honest again. Some folks are glad, some are scared. Either way, they know your name now." Lena folded the letter slowly. Jack didn't ask what it said. He didn't have to. "It's done then," she said softly. "Not done," he corrected. "Just yours now." That night, they lit the fire and sat close. The room was quiet, the storm smell still lingering in the air. Lena traced the edge of Jack's hand with her finger. "You ever think you'd end up rebuilding someone else's life?" He met her eyes. "I didn't rebuild it," he said. "You did. I just refused to walk away." Outside, the land steamed under a rising moon. Inside, hearts healed, without noise, without ceremony. Just two people dry at last, sharing the kind of silence that means you're home. Fall crept in quietly. The heat lifted, replaced by golden skies and the rustle of dry leaves across the paddock. The air smelled like dust and apples, and mornings came with mist that clung low over the fence lines. Lena loved it. The way the light filtered through the cottonwoods, how the barn groaned like it was stretching after sleep. She walked those grounds every morning before sunup. And now, when she turned back toward the house, she saw two sets of tracks instead of one. Jack had taken to building with his hands again. Not just repairs. Building. A new chicken coop, a smokehouse, a small addition to the bunk room for passing ranch hands. He worked like a man who'd realized time could add things instead of just taking them. Lena brought him lemonade one afternoon, and they stood together at the edge of the new corral, watching 3 new calves wrestle in the dirt. "I was thinking," she said, "of starting a trade line. Small runs, goods, hides, coffee up to Copper Ridge. A little Hart brand on every wagon." Jack nodded slowly. "Your father would have liked that." "I don't want to be my father." "You're not," he said. "You're the future he hoped would survive him." One evening, Lena found him sitting at the edge of the pasture, carving again. "What now?" she asked. He held it up, a small sign, rough but clear. "Home." She stared at it for a long while. "You really believe that?" "I do now." Later, while washing up in the kitchen, Lena paused, hands dripping, eyes fixed on the window. "Jack?" "Yeah? If you asked me to leave this place tomorrow, I wouldn't." Jack set his coffee down. I'd never ask you that. She dried her hands, turned to him. I used to think I needed to take back the ranch to feel whole again. But now, I think I just needed someone who wouldn't let me fall apart when it felt impossible. He crossed the room in 2 steps. Didn't kiss her, just rested his forehead against hers. You weren't the one who was lost, Lena. You were the one who stayed. That night, as they sat beside the fire, Jack finally opened the old locket he kept hidden in his saddlebag. Inside, a faded photo of a younger man in uniform, a name scratched behind it, Elias Weston. My brother, he said quietly. Didn't make it home. Lena reached for his hand. You did? He nodded, throat tight. And I finally know why. Winter came with a whisper. Frost crept over the fence posts in delicate lace, the breath of the horses hanging like smoke in the early morning light. The fire burned longer now, and nights wrapped them in stillness that felt more like protection than silence. Inside the house, Lena Hart had finally unpacked every room. There were no more corners of her home holding ghosts, no more chains tucked into memory, just the rhythm of routine, the softness of safety, and the quiet knowledge that she had not just taken her life back, she had built something stronger. Jack leaned against the porch rail one evening, watching the snow begin to dust the far pasture. Lena joined him, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. You ever think you'd stay this long? She asked. I used to think if I stopped anywhere too long, the past would catch me. And now? He turned to her. Now I think the past stopped chasing the moment you looked at me like I was worth remembering. In late January, she rode to Tom Brock with a bundle of papers under her arm. Jack stayed behind to finish installing new hinges on the barn doors. By the time she returned that evening, she dropped the folded documents on the table, kicked the snow off her boots, and smiled like she was holding back laughter. Jack raised a brow. What'd you do? She slid the papers toward him. Filed the new land title. He opened them slowly. Hart Weston Ranch, joint ownership. He blinked once. You did this without asking. I did it because you never asked for anything. And you stayed longer than any man I've ever known. She added softly. You've earned every inch of this place, whether you like it or not. That night they danced in the kitchen to no music. Just boots sliding on worn floorboards, the clink of cutlery in the sink, and the soft sound of breath between 2 people who no longer needed anything but this. Spring would come again, and with it more calves, more repairs, more sunrises over the bluff. But what they had now didn't need seasons to prove it was real. They had land, built from scars. They had each other, built from nothing. And they had a future, built from the moment one nameless cowboy cut through iron and said, You're not dying today.